Hello, everyone. My name is Ginna Hensel. I'm an honors student, and I'm here today to present on students with disabilities in rural areas and barriers they face. Before I get started, I want to extend a huge thank you to my faculty member, Dr. John Morgan Phillips. Thank you for all of your support with this project. And also, before I get started, I'd like to point out what this picture is on the screen. This is an aerial shot of my school, Ellicottville Central School, which services grades pre-K through 12. As you can see, it's a really small school in a rural area. So this topic hits close to home for me. I'm very passionate about it. So this presentation is going to explore what students with disabilities are entitled to by law, what challenges students with disabilities in rural communities face, and possible barriers students with disabilities face when transitioning from secondary education to higher education. You know, there's minimal research studies done specifically on students with disabilities. So the other goal of this research study is to propose a plan to correctly identify and answer the research questions listed. So let's get started. First, let's talk about a couple of definition of terms. We have accommodations, disability, and specified learning disability. It's just important to know what these mean to help with the flow of presentation. All right. Hold on. Okay. So again, there are two parts to this research study. The first part is a literature review. And in the literature review, I looked at what educational barriers may exist for students with disabilities, and in what ways might these barriers impact students when transitioning into higher education. Overall, I found three challenges or three barriers students with disabilities consistently face. This first challenge is being misunderstood, and this coincides with societal views towards students with learning disabilities. When students use terms such as retard, stupid, or other self-demeaning terms, they consequently introduce and stigmatize themselves in their own brains. The second challenge is having to work harder than their peers. And this is a pretty important challenge to a student with a learning disability. There are two components to this. The first component is that if a student refuses services, some students feel that the use of accommodation shows a weakness. And so the second part is that even with the use of accommodations, students with an SLD may be still falling behind their peers. The last challenge or barrier faced is that needing to constantly require and seeking out help. So a student with an SLD may not know how to seek out strategies for success. Accommodations and support for these students are crucial if they want to succeed. But if they can't seek out resources, or they don't know how, we can't help them. So next, I want to look at what students with disabilities are entitled to by law. In 1975, Congress passed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. This was later revised and renamed for the Individuals with Disabilities Act in 1990 and 1997. But the goal of this law is to ensure that the rights of children ages 3 through 21 and their access to education despite any disabilities. The American with Disabilities Act was implemented in 1990 and included groundbreaking legislation and is sometimes referred to as the Emancipation Proclamation for persons with disabilities. The ADA provides a broader scope of privileges for persons with disabilities. And finally, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004. This one's a mouthful, but it is the main special education law and the most recently amended act in the US. The goal of this is to ensure that all students with disabilities have access to appropriate and related services and education that coincide with their disabilities. In addition, it requires schools to successfully prepare them for their future, whether that's future education or employment or independent learning. So we know that students with disabilities are entitled to services under the law. However, I found several gaps in terms of services and mandates and availability. Persons with disabilities can be defined as a minority, which is where discrimination comes into play. Discrimination and prejudice can affect persons with disabilities both in life and in educational institutions. They can face a lack of accessibility, which brings us to our next point of burden of cost. Accessibility in physical settings has a higher burden of cost for accommodations than what standard construction may have been before implementing the ADA. The same goes for education. Accessibility education costs cost more than standard educating, and due to recent state and national budget cuts, there's been a significant decrease in special education services. The next point is lack of training. Due to lack of training and education, teachers in rural communities often find themselves unable to overcome situations with students with disabilities. Many administrators face unwillingness from teachers to implement students with disabilities in their programs. And with that, lastly, comes to higher rates of discipline. So due to this lack of training, these two kind of tie together. Specifically in rural and poverty-stricken schools, students with disabilities are often subjected to more disciplinary action than their counterparts in chapter, private, and city schools. I would also like to note that there are laws that protect against this, but without appropriate training, it's extremely hard to implement. So overall, what I find from my literature review is that we're lacking the appropriate research. One of my heavily relied upon studies for this lit review dates back to 1986 with an occupational therapist, specifically in rural areas. So my methodology seeks to change this. The goal of this study is to capture the trials and tribulations of students with SLDs and what they face on a large scale in the US. I am proposing a groundbreaking research study that could change the lives of millions of children. So this research study uses correlation research by examining the relationship between students with SLDs, the educational barriers they face, and how it affects their transition to higher education. I'm going to look at what educational barriers may exist for these students with disabilities, and in what ways may these barriers impact students with disabilities when transitioning to higher education. Those are my two research questions. So the setting is going to include all 50 states. I want this to be a massive study. I understand that it's going to take a long time, but it will be worth it. We are going to exclude territories for now due to manageability reasons. 50 states is a lot to cover. So any school within 5 miles or more from an urbanized area or urbanized cluster would qualify as rural. So we will use that. Also going to look at, and for the participants, we're looking at all rural school students in grades kindergarten to 12 with an IEP in place due to an SLD, in addition to any undergrad college student who had an IEP in place in high school due to an SLD that comes from a rural high school. So we're looking specifically at kids who came from rural schools. Doesn't really matter where they transition to higher education. We just want that rural component to it. All students under the age of 18 are required to have a waiver form signed by their legal guardians stating that they are allowed to speak with the research team. And we would have 2 researchers and a designated school psychologist for this study, and they would collaborate with students and ask them questions about their time at the school. The goal is to be informal so students will feel comfortable. I would like to mention that any accommodations requested would be honored and that students and their guardians reserve the right to withdraw from the study at any point without cause. So let's look at the data collection method. The first thing on the screen you will see is Appendix A. This is the proposed research study for students in grade K through 12. As you can see, there are 4 questions that will be graded on the Likert scale. The goal is to gather quantifiable data from this, so we can assign each a number and look at it in terms of trends. That last question we leave is open-ended, so we can take into students' personal accounts and stories into play. Next, we have Appendix V, which is the proposed research study for our college students. So again, these are students coming from rural areas. Again, the data collection is going to use 1 open-ended research question and 4 questions where the answers will be placed on the Likert scale. I'd like to point out that we will be assigning 5 different categories in order to classify this. I'm going to talk a little bit more of that in a second. So as for our data analysis, again, we're going to sort those short-ended questions by assigning a number using the Likert scale. Our qualitative data from the open-ended questions will be manually sorted into 5 categories based on keywords. 1, no challenges. 2, challenges relating to family and friends. 3, challenges relating to discrimination, 4, challenges relating to location, and 5, a category for all other answers. So the interview instrument is also planning to be critiqued by a corresponding institutional review board before the start of study. We've had some professionals look at it, but I would like to point out that that is in motion. So just to wrap everything up, the methodology for this topic, I understand, will prove long and intense, but the goal is to address those barriers that these students with disabilities face. I have the power to trigger changes in policies and the quality of assistance students with disabilities receive, and that's what I'm after. At this time, this presentation and this project has gone through a mock IRB. I've gotten some feedback and applied that. I've looked into several different sources of funding, including the Clinton Foundation, but nothing has stuck. I was able to present this at the SUNY Undergrad Research Conference, so hopefully I will get some feedback from there. And we are still waiting for IRB approval and funding. I would like to extend a thank you to all of you for listening to my presentation today. If you would like a copy of Students with Disabilities in Rural Communities and Barriers They Face, please email me at the email listed upon the screen. Any additional questions and comments are welcome, and questions from my faculty mentor should be sent to the email on the screen. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you listening to my presentation. Also just going to point out my references. If you would like a complete list of my references, again, please email me and I will send that information your way. And that wraps up my presentation. Thank you.